Good morning, everybody. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce our Barbara Meredith Trust tutor, and that is Sarah Hibbert. Sarah comes to us all the way from London, and we are so scared when in the end of February some things happened in the Middle East and we went, what's going to happen with Sarah? Luckily, Sarah has booked to come through Singapore, so she's here, which is fantastic. And Sarah is here with her husband, so when you see her around later, say hello to Sarah and say hello to Paul. Now, Sarah lives just outside of London, and you'll be surprised by this. Her study is floor to ceiling with boxes of fabric. She's had a 30-year journey in quilting and has moved from traditional to more modern designs. She loves the combination of old and new, traditional and contemporary, and she works mainly in linen. Sarah's been in a position where she's had quilts acquired by the Quilters Guild of the British Isles and also the International Quilt Museum in Nebraska, so that's quite an achievement. Now, I met Sarah at QuiltCon in 2025 in Phoenix, and it has just been amazing working with her over the last 12 months about bringing her out here. It's just been an absolute joy, Sarah, and I'm so looking forward to your trunk show. Remembering Sarah's in Australia for about 3 weeks, so what she can fit in a suitcase and, clothes for 3 weeks is a bit squishy, but we're doing the very, very best we can. So Sarah, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Thank you for that great welcome. Thank you. I have to start. Every time I give a talk or a workshop, I have to do this to start, so I apologise. Hi, I'm Sarah. Right, okay. I have to psych myself up for this. I'm incredibly nervous giving this trunk show, mainly, not for you lovely ladies, but for Paul sitting in the front. He normally dumps me at the trunk show and goes out and walks off for an hour. So to actually talk in front of him is a bit nerve-wracking. So I apologise. So if I wobble on my words, blame him. Okay. As Chris said, I fell into quilting by accident, actually. I grew up in a house full of art. My father was a graphic designer, and so there was drawings and books, and when my father passed away 20 years ago, he had 64 books on Picasso and not one duplicate, and he'd read every one of them, and probably made me read them as well. So I grew up with art and drawing and things, but no fabric. There was no fabric in our house unless they were pieces of fabric that had been designed by Ray Eames and designers like that, Lucian Day and people like that, but we didn't do sewing. I don't think we even had any needles and threads in our house. My mother was a knitter, and she knitted a lot, but you had to get in quick, because when she sewed them up so badly that the one sleeve was up here, another one was down here. Oh, they were awful, but anyway. So what I really wanted to do when I left school, I was hopeless at school, and when I left school I wanted to go to art college, and I wanted to be a fabric designer. I wanted to be like Sandra Rhodes with her pink hair and design fabric for the Duchess of Kent. But my father said, no, you'll never find a career in it, you'll never do that. So I went off to secretarial college for a couple of years, and then I went off to catering college, and I ended up along my career working at the Savoy, which I absolutely loved, doing all the banquets and organising that. I got married in '82, and our daughter came along in '84, and I was twitching. I wanted to do some art, I wanted to do some sewing and things. I didn't know how to, so I took myself off to an evening class, and I made, it was an evening, one evening, and it was making a Dresden plate cushion. That was 32 years ago, and I still haven't finished it. It was horrid. It was really, really horrid. And it wasn't a UFO, it was PhD, project's half done. So, but I really liked the tutor, her name called Angela, and so I went along to my second class with her, and it was a 6-week class to do a sample quilt. And this was my first quilt. So really lovely, scratchy polyester on the back. And so this was the very first quilt I made, which I enjoyed and hand quilted. The blue splodge, I'm going to jump quite a few years on. The blue splodge here was if my daughter got married in, I don't know, 84? No, I got married in 84. I got married in 14 years ago. And her son came along 2 years later. And if you're lucky enough to be a grandparent and you get given your grandchild for the very first time, you get given this child with a list of when to feed them, when to change their nappy, all these things, and don't give them this, and don't let them do that. The fact that you brought up your daughter perfectly all right, this goes out the window. Anyway, we had Reuben, he was about 6 months old, and he gave him his bottle, he fell asleep, and I have a leather sofa, so all my quilts live on the back of my sofa, or piled up on the floor. So I pulled this quilt down, and I laid him down. Gave him to Paul and said, whatever you do, don't let him roll over, don't let him choke, don't let him... About an hour later, Paul shouted, "Sarah!" Came in. A very sleepy little boy woke up, completely blue. I had a smurf for a child. Nobody told me, Angela, who I still know very well, but we're in a group together, never told me to wash my fabric. So we had 2 hours, 20 minutes till Mum arrived. Reuben sat in the bath for 2 hours, 10 minutes. And she didn't know for a long time, so I thought he'd be rushed off to accident emergency for toxin checking. Yeah, so that was my very first quilt. So I carried on quilting, very much did my own thing, didn't follow patterns. I joined Angela's group. There's 14 of us. Unfortunately, there's only about 9 of us now. And they're my quilt family. They taught me a lot. They were quite a bit older than me. I'm still trying to catch them up in age. So I sort of very much did my own thing. So the main quilts I used to do, or I still do, is I love half square triangles. So this is an early one, an oak shot half square triangles, which I just picked up randomly and used the colours. For many years, I've always just done log cabin, half square triangles. I don't do curves. For a long time, I refuse to do curves. So that's one. About 14 years ago, I got into linen, and a friend of mine had some linen scraps that she didn't quite know what to do with. So I said, well, I'll take them off your hand, being a kind friend I am. And that got me very much into linen and hand-printed linen. So a lot of these pieces are printed by good friends of mine, Colette Rostrop, and people like that. And I just like putting squares and colour together. And this is very much one of those sort of types of quilts that I'm constantly doing. I have, when I make my quilts, I have my sewing machine, and then I just have I've got big crates of fabric, and I just pull out and cut as I'm going along. Very rarely do I plan a quilt. The unfortunate thing is I'm married to an engineering draftsman. When he used to come home, he's now retired, but when he came home from work, another quilt on the go. How many blocks? Don't know. What size? Don't know. Whereas he draws, if he's putting a plug on the wall, he'll draw it out, So so I have to work quick before he gets home. Another one this is another one. And this is the workshop that we'll be doing on the improv. This is called Serendipity. And again, it's just a mixture of pieces, but I won't tell you about the construction because obviously we're doing that in the workshop. But it's a fun way of putting the pieces together rather than laying out on the floor and thinking, oh no, that doesn't go with that, that does go with that. So it's a fun class. But this is the quilt that got me into QuiltCon. So I bumbled along with my quilt making and putting into Festival of Quilts. I've always been an active Quilt Guild member and I support Festival of Quilts very much. But in 2016 I joined the Modern Guild of America and they have an annual exhibition called QuiltCon every February. So in 2016 I joined. At the end of 2016 I got the magazine and I said to my husband, oh, do you know what, I really want to go to this. I really, really want to go to QuiltCon. I want to see these designers, Jackie Gearing, Tara Farnan, people like that, which I really did admire. I was on Instagram and I followed a lot of these people. And he said, well, if you want to go, go. You know, it'll be fantastic. Whereabouts is it? I said, Savannah. He said, oh, I don't fancy Savannah. I said, well, I didn't fancy taking you. So I took myself on my own. I met up with a lady called Pat, who I'd met through a friend of a friend. We went to Chicago. And I'd only met her for one evening, 2 hours, potluck supper. And we'd been emailing. I said, I'm going to QuiltCon, I'm really happy. She's a traditional quilter. She said, well, I don't know anything about modern. I quite fancy coming. Do you mind if I come as well? I said, well, it's a free thing. You know, if you buy it. She said, well, can I share your room? Well, I'd only known her 2 hours. So I said, well, I have to have a Starbucks first thing in the morning. Sorry, Australian people. And she said, well, I have to have a glass of wine at night. I said, we'll rub along, great. Anyway, so she came, we had a great laugh. But I walked through the door on that very first QuiltCon. Oh, I submitted a quilt. I didn't really understand about the judging because at Festival of Quilts, whatever you put into Festival Quilts, it gets hung. Whereas QuiltCon, I thought that was sort of the thing, but it's not. At that time, there was about 2,000 quilts submitted, and they only chose 400. Well, my Serendipity got chosen, so I was really chuffed. And I walked through the door, and I met Jackie Gearing the first day. And it was like, oh my God, a hero. And she gave me the confidence to bowl up to people and say, hi, I'm Sarah, I love your work. And I've got to know such a lot of people and learning so much from them as well. Which that first QuiltCon in 2017 was fantastic. At the end of the day, at the end of the 4 days, I saw Jackie Gearing and she said, so, Hibbert, London. I said, yep. She said, are you coming again? I said, I'm going to come every year until there's no breath in my body. And it is, that's my lifeline for the year. I go for that 1 week. And I absolutely love it. Met you as well, which was great. So each year I've been going to that. In 2019, I met a lady called Kristen, and we communicated on FaceTime and things. And she said, have you heard of a thing called 100-Day Project? I said, no, I don't know. And it's something that's on Instagram, and it runs for 100 days, obviously. And you can bake a cake, make a batch of cookies, knit a jumper, paint, do anything for 100 days, and you put it up on Instagram. And I said, well, I'm actually a bookkeeper. I do bookkeeping and payroll, and at that time I had 15 clients. And I said, well, I haven't got time to sew every day, but one thing I did do is I did collage. I always made collage, pretty much every day. Just a little bit of paper cutting, and I used to just throw it in a big box under my desk. Never did anything with them. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to do collage every day for 100 days, which I did. Day 57, I really liked my collage. And I didn't put it in the box, I put it on the wall. And every time I was looking at it, I thought, that would make a great quilt. That would really make a great quilt. But the only problem is it had curves. I don't do curves. quite a few of my quilt friends say, I'll show you. Oh, I'm going to go through life, I don't need to know those. I wanted to do this, so I did, and I explained that in a 2-day class when we were doing the collage. But this was the quilt that came out of that. It's called the Macaroon quilt. Official name is quilt number 57. So the collage, I took it off to the photocopying shop, got them to blow it bigger, and then I came home and I cut it out in paper, and then I got a cereal packet, and I did my curves. I was really pleased. I put it into Festival of Quilts, and the remarks were, your circles aren't round. And your point doesn't match. And your other point runs away. But I was pleased with it, so it was fine. It was great. The following year, Festival of Quilts approached me to use it as their poster. So, that got me on the road to collage and quilt. This was another quilt from that idea of collage quilt. This one? I would, again, I do log cabins and half square triangles. I don't do this. And this was actually a Gap advert, you know, the jean company. It was 2 colours of blue. I love blue. 2 colours of blue with the word Gap along the middle. And what I did was I really liked that image, so I tore the advert out and I folded it up and just cut it randomly and then sprinkled the pieces on the table, and I cherry-picked my pieces, and then I made each bit individual. Because to actually sit down and draw an abstract quilt, I wouldn't know where to do. So this gave me that ability to do it. It's a quilt as you go. So that was all quilt as you go. So that got, again, onto the role of doing it. So I started making quite a few collage quilts, as I call them, or collage to quilt, and then people were asking me, what do you mean? Because I always titled them collage to quilt number 57 or whatever. And what do you mean? So I said, well, you do a paper collage and then you make a quilt, you know. And it was, so in the end I ended up writing a book in 2020, and it was published late because of COVID and because of the way of the world. It got published in 22, so it's called Collage to Quilt, and it talks you through the process. So along with my collage quilts, I still love going back to what I call my traditional quilts, not just the quilts that I really like, using lots of fabric. So this is... So again, this is using Japanese fabric. This pattern is actually on my website. It's called Happy Starts. And it's a good scrap buster using some of those extra pieces. I love putting that one together. And I've made it quite a few times in just a plain colour as well. Two more. I love hand quilting, and I do a lot of hand quilting. But again, this is just using scraps of colour, making crosses. This again is a fun, quirky quilt to do. So, my last quilt. The reason, right, I have been incredibly lucky in my quilt journey. I've had solo galleries in various places, but I had a solo gallery in Seoul. I was the first Western quilter to exhibit there, and that was in 24. And how I got there is really quite a long story, well, but I'll keep it short. I made this quilt, I had a contract, accounting contract in Uxbridge, and it was quite a long journey each day. And I listened on the radio, and it was a guy called John Cooper Clarke, who is a sort of poet, and he was a bit of a punk, and all sorts of things. But he was talking about haikus. And I thought, you know what, I'd love to write a haiku. So I was like, the cat sat on the mat, and I was doing this all the car. I thought, well, why not do it in fabric? So this is my haiku quilt. So a haiku is 5 words, 7 words, and 5 words. So I made, these are words. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 5, and there's a full stop at the end. So I put this up on Instagram each time I was putting it together. Oh, another word for my haiku. And a few people sort of questioned it. And I said, well, no, it's a haiku. Anyway, I had a lady from Seoul contact me, and she said, I've been following you for a while, I'm really interested in your piece. I would love, that's okay, thank you. I would really love to make a piece as well. And I said, yeah, I'd be honoured, that would be great. I don't, as long as somebody puts on their Instagram that it was inspired by me, I want to encourage quilters out there to dip their toes in and to explore their own journey. And if I've helped in any way, then that's a real bonus. So she wanted to make a haiku quilt, and I said, yeah, yes, please, that would be great, which she did. And then she made 3 or 4 others, which were lovely, very much her style, but with an idea about mine. In 24, I had a solo, in 22, I had a solo gallery at Festival of Quilts. And the Korean quilters had a very small gallery, and a gentleman came over who looks after all the quilters, a guy called Sanook, who is about 1 million feet tall, and he bought me a gift from her. And I knew she was doing that, so I'd made a gift for her. And he said, I'd like you to come and exhibit in Seoul. And I said, well, that's a real honour, thank you very much. I said, would it be possible to have 5 of Jay Young's quilts and 5 of mine, because it would be lovely to put them together. And he said, no. I said, well, you're a mean man, I don't know if I want to come. And he said, why? I said, well, she's had a gallery herself. I said, yeah, but I really want to see her work with mine, because it would be nice. So I arranged to go to Seoul in 24, and we were backwards and forwards with emails. It really bugged me that I wouldn't see her work next to mine. So I contacted Festival of Quilts. So I had a gallery in 22, and in 24, I said, would it be possible to have another gallery? Will you only ever get 1 gallery? And I said, the reason I want another gallery is to put her work with mine. And they said yes. So she came over, and she had 18 of her pieces, and I had 18 of mine. I made 2 like hers, so it was, and I think out of everything I've done, that's I'm most proud of, was that gallery, was putting our 2 work together. She couldn't speak English, my Korean is roop, but the language of quilting and putting 2 people's ideas together blew me away, it really did. So from there, it's sort of gone on, and then I've been invited here, so I feel, I hate the word just, but I'm just a quilter from London, and I really enjoy the quilt community, and I thank you for inviting me, and let's have a great 4 days. Thank you. Collage the quilt. The publisher contacted me, and I said yes, I would write it. But it was quite funny because he said, well, the first thing I want is 14 quilts. I said, well, you're not going to get that. I've never written a pattern in my life. I'm not going to do that. Then he said, well, I want 25,000 words. I said, no, you're not getting that either. I've never written anything. And anyway, we put our heads together, and we put this quilt together. And it was good fun. But the reason, if you could, the reason I did this book was to thank Rod Stewart. Rod Stewart is the reason I wrote this book and how I got into collage. Because when I was 14, my older brother, bought me a David Cassidy album. And he bought himself Rod Stewart. So every day he was at school and things, I used to go and get the Rod Stewart. And in the end, the Rod Stewart album lived in the David Cassidy album cover. I covered covered my walls with Rod Stewart. I came home at 14 with a very bad school report. I attended school, I didn't skip it, but I wasn't very good at it. And my father blamed Rod Stewart. So he came up into my room and he ripped all my posters down. And I wasn't allowed to put Rod Stewart up. So Rod Stewart went under the bed in a scrapbook. And I covered my walls. And that's how I got into collage. So that's why. So if it wasn't for my dad, I wouldn't be making Rod Stewart album cover quilts. But there is a little story. I did get Rod Stewart to sign the book. That's a story for the workshop.